Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the People on the Go Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Melissa Sweat, Customer Relationship and Community Manager at People on the Go, and I'll be moderating our session today. You are here for the explanation revolution, why new skills are needed for a complicated world, and I have with me Lee LeFever, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. But before we get started, let's just do a quick technology check to make sure that you can hear me just fine and see the screen. Please go ahead and locate the questions panel and go to webinar and just type in a hi, a hello, and all sounds good. Okay, I already see them coming in. Thank you, Brenda, just to let me know that everything's working just fine. Thank you, Sylvia, Phoebe, Marianne. Thank you all so much. By the way, if you are having any trouble, the number to call is right there on the screen. 1-800-263-6317, and I'll also be on to assist you as well. We will be sending you a copy of the recording by end of day tomorrow, so please be on the lookout for that. Just a quick background about why we have these sessions at People on the Go, especially for those who are with us for the first time. We have these lunch and learn sessions because our focus is productivity and leadership in the workplace, and the topics on the screen are some of the topics that we cover. We have a very special prize for you today, Lee's book, The Art of Explanation, and we'll be giving away 3 copies of his book today. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have more details for you on how you can enter to win the prize. So do stay tuned for that. And now I'll go ahead and introduce Lee. Lee LeFever has been a professional explainer for over a decade. He is the co-founder of Common Craft, author of The Art of Explanation, and host of the Explainer Academy. Since 2007, Common Craft has won numerous awards, created explanations for the world's most respected brands, and created explainer videos that have earned over 50 million online video views. Today, Common Craft produces educational guides, ready-made videos, and visuals that are used by educators and explainers in over 50 countries. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lee. And this transition here will take just a moment. All right.
Okay, can you hear me, Melissa?
Yes, and looks great, Lee. Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready to get started. All right. Okay, well, thanks so much for being here. My name is Lee LeFever, as Melissa said. Thank you for that introduction, Melissa. And we're here to talk about the explanation revolution. One quick thing here. Melissa, I'm seeing the GoToWebinar panel in
Uh-huh.
front of my screen. I wonder if I can just, here we go. This will probably do it. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's get started. Um, as Melissa said, I'm the co-founder of Common Craft, and our thing is really a focus on explanation and explanation skills. That's what we'll talk about. And I'll start with one of my favorite quotes, and this is from the playwright George Bernard Shaw. The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think that a lot of you can probably sympathize with with that quote. And I think that really kind of summarizes some of the things we'll talk about today. And I think that one of the problem and why this happens is that it's often easy to take communication and explanation for granted, right? For a lot of times when it's our turn to make something understandable for someone, to make it clear, it kind of just happens. It just happens as a natural part of communication, and we don't necessarily think about it as a specific event that we can plan for, we can make better, that we can improve. And that's really our focus today. And I want you to be able to think and ask questions like, how do I explain, or what could I do better? And I think that's the kind of thing that sometimes we don't necessarily always think about. I like to compare it to something like making friends, or being liked, or how to make a first impression, or how to influence others. We sort of grow up doing these things every day, and we do them so often that I think it becomes just a part of how we operate, and we don't necessarily think about ways that we can actually do it better, right? It's easy to say, like, aren't these things obvious? Doesn't everybody know how to make friends? I mean, that's just what we do, right? But I think that hidden in that sort of sentiment is the reality that not everybody actually does know how to do that very well, that there are opportunities to improve. And I think we see that from this gentleman. This is Dale Carnegie. He wrote the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this book has been has sold over 50 million copies. Even today, it stays in the top 25 books in Amazon. And I think that's because he saw that there's this thing that people are doing all the time, and they're maybe not thinking about how they could do it better. And I think that there's some connection here between this idea of how we communicate, how we explain, being just a part of us, and it being similar to how we make friends. And it's easy to think like, oh, that's just how I do it, right? It's really just like human nature. We approach this from a very natural sort of way. And I think that there is an opportunity to think about these things we do naturally that are part of our nature and kind of pull them out of human nature and think, you know what, I bet I could do this better. And if I did this one thing better, I could have a bigger influence on friends, or I could be a clearer communicator. So that's a little bit of sort of context for the talk, is this idea of explanation being a part of human nature that we can actually improve. Now, after doing a little bit of a background on my approach to getting into this whole idea, we'll focus on three questions today. And the first is, what is the role of the explainer? And this is where we talk about the role of the explainer in a revolution. And we'll look at a dynamic that I think each one of you will recognize very easily, that shows sort of the challenge of explanation and clarity that sort of pervades everything we do, and why it's such a challenge to make things clear for an audience. And then we'll look at a very simple model that is meant to help you see that explanations, it's actually more of an approach to thinking about how to explain nearly anything by thinking of the shape of an explanation. So we'll finish up with that. So I'd like to get started with a quick story that really frames how I got into this whole idea of being an explainer and wanting to create media that explains. And this goes back to around 2004 or 2005. I attended a small conference in Silicon Valley, and a CEO of a local tech company was speaking, and he was talking about trends on the internet, things that we should be aware of, things that we should be learning about because they were going to be a big part of the future. And he mentioned RSS. And some of you may know RSS. It stands for Really Simple Syndication, and it provides a way for us to subscribe to websites so that new content comes to us when it's published. And at the time, RSS was new and interesting, and he mentioned RSS, and a gentleman in the conference raised his hand and asked the simple question, what is RSS? Easy question. And the CEO said words that I'll never forget, and this is really where I had sort of an epiphany. He said, RSS is an XML-based content syndication format, and then just went on like that was all that was needed to say. And the guy's hand went down, and you could feel this collective, like, whoa, like in the room, because it helped nobody. Those words in that order didn't help anybody really with what RSS is or why it matters. And being in the room that day, it was really a time of epiphany for me, because I was really fascinated with these new social media tools like blogs and wikis and social networking, and I really believed that they were going to be transformational tools that could have huge adoption. And the problem that I saw was that in order for people to adopt these things, they had to understand them first. People had to be able to think about them in a different way. That's things like RSS as an XML-based content syndication format was not really going to help. There needed to be a better way to do it. And I started to look at how people were communicating about these new tools. And a lot of times the questions that they were asking, or the questions they were answering, I should say, were things like, what is it? What are the features? How is it engineered? This is the sort of insider expert perspective on it. And oftentimes their language and their approach to the communication was focused on peers, right? And looking informed, like showing how deep they could go into the details and using what was often an industry specific language. And I really felt in my heart like this is not going to help the people that are going to eventually adopt these new tools. So Sachi and I really saw an opportunity to answer a different kind of question and really approach this idea of explaining these technologies from the perspective of answering a question like, why should anybody care about this? Why should anyone care? Why does this matter? And why does it make sense that this is a thing? Why does it make sense that this was invented, or what need does it serve? And these questions became the questions that have driven all of our explanations ever since, was getting away from the detailed specifics of something and talking about these higher level ideas that hopefully engage people and get them interested. A few years later, we saw the idea, YouTube was a growing thing, and we thought maybe we can make videos that explain these things that we saw this opportunity from a couple of years ago. And really, on sort of a whim, we put together a video called RSS in Plain English and put it on YouTube in 2007. And that video literally changed our lives. It was immediately sort of a viral success. Some of the attendees may have seen it even at the time. But this video became the first explainer video of the YouTube era. And Sachi and I kind of became explainers. And that's really what we've done since then, is always focused on taking the language and the facts and the information that the experts know and can talk about, and transforming them into a media experience that's designed for understanding. That really is trying to account for people like our parents who just want to know, why should I care about this? And that's led us to do a lot more. We've made those videos that they've been viewed 50 million times. We took all the lessons that we had learned from years and years of making these videos and wrote The Art of Explanation. And then our newest thing is an online school called the Explainer Academy, where we kind of teach in more of a sort of classroom sort of setting online. So we're explainers. That's what Sachi and I say that we are, and I think there's a lot of explainers out there. Some of you may be explainers as well. But this sort of leads us to this question, the first big question of the day, which is what is an explainer? Like, what role does an explainer play? And I think throughout the talk today there'll be more examples, but one of my favorites is actually from this guy, Kurt Vonnegut. He wrote a book called Bluebeard in 1988. And it's not about pirates, even though it sounds like it. But there's an idea that emerges in that book that I think is one of the best ways I think of really framing the idea of an explainer. So the book, Bluebeard, is mostly based sort of in a farmhouse where these very sort of influential and accomplished artists debate all sorts of things. And one of the things that they debate is the idea of revolution. And they talk about, like, what does it take for there to be a successful revolution? Like, what things need to be in place? And one of the characters says that he knows that he has this idea that it's a team of specialists. And he says that in every revolution there are these three people that make a team that are at the heart of every revolution. So he says that the first one is the authentic genius. This is the person with this transformational idea, right? But the problem with the authentic genius is that working alone, they might be known as a nutcase or someone who has, gone off his or her rocker. So the genius can't operate alone. The genius needs an upstanding citizen. This is someone, an intelligent person that's a respected part of the community that can look to the authentic genius and say, people, we should be listening to them. They have great ideas. This is, I'm giving this person credibility. So those are really two powerful roles. But that's not enough. The third sort of leg of the stool for revolution is the idea of the explainer. And this is the person who can take ideas, no matter how complicated, from the genius and from the citizen and explain them to the satisfaction of the public, to give the public a view of this information that is understandable, that is clear and actionable. So these are the three things that are required for revolutions, according to this character Salinger in Bluebeard. I like to call these roles, ideas, credibility, and understanding. So these are the three things that are involved, I think, matter outside of revolution in almost everything is ideas, credibility, and understanding. And we see this a lot even today in technology. I think there might be a talented programmer that comes up with an amazing idea that he or she feels like is going to be transformational. But it's not enough to have an idea. There's got to be credibility, right? So this might be the programmer's peers and friends and coworkers who point to the programmer and say, that is awesome. This deserves attention. I'm putting credibility here. But the reality is that credible ideas are not enough, right? If you think of a lot of the tools that are so popular, Twitter, Dropbox, things like that are really kind of weird and complicated and hard to understand, having the credible idea is not enough. There's got to be a way to focus on understanding, of taking this complicated new revolutionary idea and transforming it into something that the public can understand. And to me, that's the role that we've played a lot in the past, and this is where I want to encourage people and advocate for that being a focus for people, is the understanding side, because I don't think that happens often enough. So I hope from this you'll think about what is your revolution. It doesn't have to be a political, social revolution. It can be something that happens inside your company or for your customers. And does it have an explainer? Like perhaps that's you. Like, are you the person that can really focus on this idea of understanding, right? Because I think that's where there's a lot of power. So I'm going to switch gears here and talk about the second question, which was, why is explanation such a challenge, or why is understanding something new such a challenge? And I want to sort of position this as something I call the two sides of explanation. And I think that you'll see what I mean here. That I think that if you think of nearly every situation, especially in the world of work, and other places too, that there's really kind of two groups, right? We can think about these two sides. There's the experts, and then there's the curious people, right? So this could mean teachers and students. This could mean a CEO and employees, or a company and customers, or scientists and the public. But this dynamic between these two sides, I think, is really fundamental. And thinking about how information travels across these two sides and how we can bridge the gap between these two sides, because I think that if we can bridge it, that's a good thing. If curious people can learn from experts, and we can create more experts. So that's really what we're talking about, is this gap here, and how ideas and how information can travel across this gap, and also what's keeping it from happening now. Like, what's the challenge of closing this gap? So to do that, we'll start off by looking at the world of the expert and how building expertise transforms us and influences how we communicate. So here's what I mean by that. If you think about the CEO who presented about RSS, or the authentic genius, right? I think that those are examples of experts, and the truth is that we are all experts in something, right? We don't have to be, Nobel Prize winners to be experts. We're all expert in something, and that process of becoming an expert, I think, is an interesting thing to think about in terms of how we approach communication. One way to look at it is, we all start learning with a lot of the fundamentals, right? And our knowledge and our confidence grows over time. And as we become more expert in something, we want to be challenged, right? That when we look back at the fundamentals might seem kind of boring after a while. We don't really we're not excited about it, we don't want to talk about it. What really gets the expert's attention is the hard problems, right? Talking about the pushing the envelope, talking about what the next thing is, and really dealing with details and specifics that other experts, that other experts want to be able to, learn more about. And again, this process, I think, it influences us. It influences us, right? This focus does. At the same time, when we're an expert, we might also live in a bit of a bubble where a lot of the people that we talk to on a day-to-day basis are inside that bubble. And that means that our communication with them starts to feel more natural. There's language and examples and jargon that inside the bubble sound perfectly reasonable, and that's just how you talk at work. And that's a challenge sometimes when you have to step outside of the bubble and you realize that maybe you've become too comfortable with some of that type of communication. So that's another challenge of the expert is thinking about that. And I think that when you're an expert in something too, it's easy to lose sight of what it's like to be a curious person, right? And I think that one of the ways to think about this is a concept called the curse of knowledge. I first heard about the curse of knowledge from a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. It's a book I really recommend. And the basic idea of the curse of knowledge is that the more that you know about something, the harder it is to imagine what it's like not to know. That your level of knowledge influences your ability to look at an audience and make accurate assumptions about what they know. And for someone whose goal is explanation, that's a really hard thing to overcome because you're forced to make assumptions about where to sort of dial the complexity in to make it work. And the curse of knowledge happens to us all all the time. I have the curse of knowledge, you have it. It's sort of one of those human nature things. This is what happens to people. And I think understanding it and understanding how that influences how we communicate is really powerful. So if we look at the world of the expert, just to sum some of these ideas up, the expert is excited about solving the hard problems and pushing the envelope often. Sometimes there's this bubble effect where things start to sound much more normal inside the bubble, language, examples, and jargon, and the curse of knowledge, and maybe losing touch with how normal people talk about this subject that maybe the expert has become so comfortable with. So these are things that I think influence us all when we get to be an expert in something or when we spend a lot of time focusing on something, and that changes how we communicate, that changes how we explain. And I think the real problem here from my perspective is that expertise does not equal clarity, right? Someone's level of expertise does not necessarily mean that they can communicate about it from a clear perspective. And I think that really strikes at the heart of some of the problems that happen in this world of explanation, is that when we don't understand something, we look to the experts and we can respect their expertise, but maybe not be able to actually understand what they do or why what they do matters. And we'll see that a little bit when we start to think about the curious people. And the last thing I want to do, of course, is vilify experts. We need more experts. That's really what this is really about. And I think that if we can think about the world of the curious person, then maybe we can see opportunities to help solve this problem. So let's talk about what it means to be a curious person, right? We're all curious about something. We all know that experience of thinking, oh man, I've just discovered this thing and I want to learn about it. I really want to to build my expertise in this. And we have this same thing where, we slowly build expertise and hopefully our confidence is going up. But what happens a lot of times, depending on the field, is we reach a point where, we've covered the basics, we've got the fundamentals down. We need to take that extra step towards expertise, right? We're curious and we're motivated, and we think, who can help? Like, okay, I need to start talking to experts. I need to start reading journals by experts, or I need to start really diving in. And we look to the other side of the gap, and we see the experts over there who are knowledgeable and experienced. And I think what happens, and this is one of those really kind of macro kind of ideas of this dynamic, is that there's a mismatch between the curious people who are trying to learn and the world of the expert, which we just discussed. There's the curse of knowledge. There's this, their expertise has influenced them. I think that this mismatch is where a lot of problems come from. And I think of it as a sensitive process. I don't know about you, but when I learn something, it doesn't take a lot to make me feel like, okay, I'm lost. I'm not smart enough for this, or this is just not working. You sort of build yourself up, and then when you're confronted with something that is obviously written from the perspective of an expert, what can happen is your confidence goes down and you lose interest. Right? It's happened to me many, many times. I think it might have happened to you too. And I think this is a sad situation, right? We want people to be able to keep learning, and the experts know the information, but expertise does not equal clarity. So I think this is really a problem that I hope to be able to help solve, and we need more explainers to do that, is thinking about closing this gap that exists between these two people that are a part of nearly everything we do. And the part of the problem is there's different interests, different language, different perspectives. And I think that, the question is, how do we help curious people benefit from experts, right? Like, what is the thing that helps this information travel a little bit better? And I call this being an advocate for the curious. That's one of the things that I feel really strongly about what I do in my job is I advocate for the curious side, and I say these people have, we should be communicating with people more clearly, and we can get the curious people to become experts, right? And I think this is the role of the explanation specialist. And this might be a third party, this might be someone who comes in, or it could be an expert who learns explanation skills. But the idea is to be able to take the jargon, examples, and the language of the expert and transform it into a different form, right? To be able to say, okay, if you're working on this presentation, let's work on it together, and I will advocate for the curious, and we'll try to find ways to make your document, your infographic, or whatever it is, more understandable. And then to be able to go to the curious people and say, okay, I know that you're curious about this. I want to help you feel confident about it. I've worked with the experts to create this thing that is going to help you understand it. So I think that this is kind of the role of the explainer, is helping the curious people, advocating for them, taking what the experts know and transforming it into a new form. Right, so that's the role. Another role of the explainer, from my perspective, is sort of the person that bridges this gap. And like I said, this could be anyone. It doesn't have to be a third party that comes in. You can be a curious person or an expert and still make this the intention. Make the intention transforming complicated, hard to understand information into something that will benefit curious people. And a focus on clarity is really the big part of doing that. So I'd like to finish up with our third question here. That was partially inspired also by Kurt Vonnegut. If you've ever seen a video about him, a lecture called The Shape of Stories, you can find it on YouTube if you just look Vonnegut Shape of Stories. But it made me think, is there a way to approach the idea of explaining nearly everything in the form of like an easy to visualize model? Just a basic idea of how do I approach this concept of explaining something new. And I thought, what if it could be the shape of a light bulb? Like, that would actually be a pretty memorable thing to use, would be a light bulb. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it, I said, maybe there's something here. And I will say that you're some of the first people to see this concept. I've only talked about it once in the past. It's not on the web or anything. So I'd love to know what you think about it. So the idea is to start at the top of the light bulb and go down. So here's an example. We'll start with what I call the anchor. And I think that if you have a goal of explaining something new to someone that you kind of have to anchor it. You have to limit the entire realm of possibility to this one thing. So this is thinking about, what is it? What's the basic idea? And for an example here, we'll just use the example of a stethoscope, kind of a simple example. We say this is a stethoscope. It's used by doctors to listen to heartbeats. So it's not a car or a cloud or whatever else, it's a stethoscope. So once we've anchored it, then we think shape of the bulb here. We go broad, right? We don't go narrow. We go broad. We don't get into specifics. We don't get into details, right? We build a world around the idea, right? So what does that mean? One thing that I'm a huge fan of is building context, right? Taking the time to talk about the world around the idea. So an example here is like big picture. Why does it make sense that this thing exists? Why should I care? Kind of a thing. For the stethoscope, that might mean that your health can be measured by how your heart and lungs sound, right? That's a sort of contextual idea about stethoscopes. So then we can stay broad. Again, shape of the bulb, we're still at the top part, we're still going broad. This might be a time to tell a quick story or a quick scenario, right? Like how does a person use it? What's a scenario that can help me see this thing in action? An example of a story could be a nonfiction story about an ant that was having problems breathing and how a stethoscope helped the doctor diagnose a problem. Stories take a million forms, so I don't want to be prescriptive with this one. Again, top of the bulb still, we're still broad. We're still building this world around the idea, right? So an example here might be analogy of really thinking about, what is it like? What does somebody already understand that can be connected to this new idea? So an example here is like a stethoscope is like headphones, but instead of music, you can listen to heartbeats, right? Just a simple kind of analogy here. So quick review on this top part here. We've talked about starting with an anchor and then going broad, right? Things like context, story, and analogy. Excuse me. So I think that this is really the idea of starting with a solid foundation. We want people to have the context. And what I often say is you start with the forest and then talk about the trees. Because when you're an expert, when you know something well, the trees are what is really interesting to you. So you might want to just go right into the trees. But if you're serious about being clear, if you're serious about explanation, you have to build that foundation of context first. So that means going broad, again, top of the bulb. So now that we've built this foundation, we can talk about going narrow, right? We get into the specifics and details. And we do this partially because the specifics and details will make so much more sense with context, right? With that foundation in place. So what does this look like? Well, this might be an example. We might get into a very specific example of how does it help someone, or who does it help? How is it used? Example here could be so that, if you have a heart murmur, your doctor could easily hear it. Another thing is going a little bit more narrow, a little more specific here, are things like instructions. Like, how do I maximize this? Like, what are the steps I need to take? How do I do this the right way? Is an example here. So the instructions for a stethoscope might be that you put the headset on your ears and you hold the chest piece on your body. This is how you do it the right way. Again, now we're getting even more narrow, more focused, and we start to think about, how are we going to give people what they need to move on from here? Like, what are the talking points, right? This might be a time to review the big points we've made at the top of the explanation. We might be talking about what to remember. Here's the 2 or 3 points you should remember. Here are the take-homes from this. So now we've gotten sort of to the bottom, so we'll do kind of a quick review. We go from the top where we anchor it and talk about what this thing is that we're explaining. We go broad, and then we go narrow, and then we have the take-homes. Like, this is what you should know. Here's the 1 or 2 things, or 2 to 3 things that really matter. So in between, we have things like context, story, and analogy, and then examples, instructions, and review, and then the take-homes. So this is the sort of shape of explanations in the form of a light bulb. And I hope that the next time that you think, okay, the person in front of me right now is not getting this, I need to explain this better, think of the light bulb. Think of the shape of the light bulb. Go broad and then go narrow. And that's really what we want to do, is to be able to turn on light bulbs, right? That's like the classic sort of metaphor for understanding something new or for ideas. So that's really what I hope that you've gotten from today's talk, is a sort of big picture view of the world of explanation. And I hope that you see that it's perhaps a little bit more interesting and maybe complex and than maybe you thought. And I hope that I've encouraged you to think about your own explanations and how you approach this idea of making something understandable, and what influences that, like what influences you have in terms of how you communicate. So if you're really interested in learning more about explanation, I really do think that our Explainer Academy is a great way to start. It's online self-paced courses, so it's things that you can do on your own time. We have an explanation master course and a media maker course about making explainer videos, and a free course is probably the best way to get started. And with that, I'm all finished. Thank you so much for coming today. I hope it's been great and that your lunch was delicious as well. So now I'll turn it over to Melissa, and we'll take the next step.
Thank you so much, Lee, for your presentation. That was excellent. By the way, this is Lee's contact info if you'd like to be in touch. And in our post webinar email that we're going to be sending out, we're going to have some handy links to the Explainer Academy that Lee mentioned, and the recording as well. So please be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much to everyone who's asking questions already. We are going to get to the Q&A. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to go just a little bit over today, so we really appreciate you sticking with us this afternoon. Just a few reminders before we get into the Q&A. And again, please feel free to start asking some more questions now, and we'll get into those in just a moment. Today's prize, we're giving away 3 copies of Lee's book, The Art of Explanation. And to be entered into the drawing, all that you need to do is to fill out the feedback form that's going to pop up on your screen once we exit the webinar today. It'll just pop up automatically. Just fill out that form and you'll be entered into the drawing. And again, we're going to give away 3 copies, and we will notify winners via email. I'd like to also just point out that you can give the gift of time this season. Pierre Khawand, our founder, has just released the Perfect 15-Minute Day Method book, which is about managing your time, thoughts, and emotions. We have it in book form, ebook, audiobook. We have a journal that's really handy, and an e-course that gets you started into the method. So I invite you to check that out, and you can do so. A handy link is perfect15.com. That's perfect15.com. A great gift for yourself, colleagues, friends, and family as well. So please do check that out there. And then I also invite you to become an active member of our community. You can follow our blog. You can join our Accomplishing More with Less groups on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also check out more info on the Perfect 15-Minute Day on our Facebook page, People on the Go's page on LinkedIn, and you can follow our founder, Pierre Khawand, on Twitter. Some upcoming webinars for you to take your learning further. We have project management for non-project managers coming up on the 6th and 13th, a 2-part webinar. Excel techniques coming up on the 6th as well, and then advanced Microsoft Excel pivot tables coming up on the 13th. And you can find information on those on our website. And with that, let's get into the Q&A. Thank you, Samantha, for the feedback. Love it. I think she was really enjoying the light bulb analogy. That was awesome. Bill here has a question. He says, too many people never describe context and just launch into the interesting details for them. Yeah, that's a good question. How do you stop them and get them to retrace and go back to the context to kind of get you started from that entry point?
That's a great question. I think that's one of those things that is a sort of interpersonal interaction, and it depends
Yeah.
it depends a lot on the person to whom you're speaking and how maybe open they are to that sort of thing. I think for people who are more open to it, it can be as simple as saying, can you talk a little bit more about the big picture? Because that's something I ask all the time. And I think people, as Bill said, they often want to head straight for the trees and forget about
Mhm.
forest and maybe even positioning like that and saying, hey, what's the forest here? What's the big picture that's going to help me see the details from a new perspective?
Yes, and Annalie has a great question too. Do you think everyone can be an explainer, or does it depend on how much knowledge you have on the subject to be explained, or other things? Or yeah, does the explainer necessarily need to be the person that has all the knowledge? And by the way, Lee, it seems you're breaking up just a little bit. It was great throughout the presentation, but
Oh,
we'll see if it's still working out
okay.
here.
Okay. Do you hear me okay right now?
Yeah, yeah, actually, that's coming in clear. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. So yeah, another great question. I think that in the role of the explainer, in order to explain something, the explainer has to understand it. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be an expert. It doesn't mean they have to know a lot about it. It means that in order to be able to create an effective explanation, the explainer has to take the time and even do sort of self-checks to make sure that they actually do understand the thing they're explaining, because if that doesn't happen, then I don't think that you can be an effective explainer. You can't make something understandable for someone else unless you understand it first. And sometimes a matter of scope, right? A lot of the videos that we make at Common Craft, the information you can find on a Wikipedia entry. It's not about this depth, really deep knowledge that makes something like an explainer video work. It's all about the presentation, and it's all about the script writing and how it's presented, and not so much about the knowledge. So I think that yeah, that's a good question.
Great. Thank you, Lee. And I'm sorry, everyone. It seems like it's breaking up just a little bit. What we're gonna just do our best to get through the other questions here. So Lee, how can companies, really start to foster a culture of explanation, either
You
within
know,
or without, because we all have, obviously there's the, interdepartment or within your own department, the need for
mhm,
explanation, then the outer explanation, if you're in the marketing, advertising department. So yeah,
sure.
just, yeah, in within or without, how do you think we can improve there?
Sure, sure. One of the things that I think is a dynamic that happens a lot is um, this is sort of one of those human nature things. It's really hard to raise your hand and say, I don't understand,
Yeah.
right? When you say that, it's easy for people, you assume people might think that you either weren't listening or you're not very smart or whatever. But I think that having a culture, and even within a team, where the leader or the person that is sort of setting the tone makes it okay to say I don't understand, I think can be really powerful, because it's like that time when you're in elementary school when the teacher says, does anybody have a question? Nobody raises their hand, but then one person raises their hand and asks the question, and then 80% of the people are relieved because they had the same question and didn't ask it,
Yeah.
right? So I think that that happens also in our day-to-day lives, and both having the courage to say I don't understand, but also having a culture in your team or in your business or in your company that allows for that and even promotes it, I think can be a good thing.
That's wonderful. And thank you all so much for your questions and for staying over time today. And we will be sending you again a copy of the recording and some follow-up info. Thank you so much, Lee, for your presentation. Really, really appreciate it. And once more, that feedback form will pop up on your screen, and just take a few moments to fill that out, and you'll be entered into the drawing. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And thanks again, Lee. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.